Good evening. Can I have you all take your places, please? Please stand with me, face the flag. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated, and we'll start shortly here. Good evening. I want to welcome all of you here this evening, and I also want to welcome all of you who have come from out of town to visit our city beautiful today. My name is Rhonda Vayu, and I'm your host for this evening. First, want to give some thank yous out to the City of New Richmond for allowing us to use their facility for the candidate forum. They also helped put in time and work to set up for us also, so we appreciate them. I want to thank Cedar Creek Inn and the owner, Barb Coons, who sponsored the forum this evening. Barb uses her establishment to host the VFW Beat Raffle on a monthly basis for 8 months out of the year to support the veterans. I also want to thank WITC and Alex and Scotty for taking care of the recording for tonight. And the many volunteers, I think there's like 8 of them who have come in to help tonight. So I appreciate them all. A couple of housekeeping rules. If you need to use the restroom at any time, you go out the door in the back and they're on your right-hand side. And I want to ask you to keep in mind that we are all here, we all have our own opinions, and we may or may not agree with everything we might hear this evening. However, I ask that we respect each other and treat each other with kindness. And remember, too, that the voting booth is where you will express your decision on the ballot. And now I'd like to introduce our candidates for the evening. Our incumbent, Sean Duffy, is a Republican. He serves on the House Financial Services Committee and chairs a subcommittee on housing and insurance. He also served as district attorney for Ashland County for almost a decade, from August of 2002 to July of 2010. He is nationally known as a professional lumberjack athlete, holding several world titles. He has been a color commentator on ESPN's Great Outdoor Games and a participant on MTV's Real World, where he met his wife, Rachel Campos Duffy. They live in Wausau with their 8 children. Representative Duffy has sent his regrets that he was unable to be here today because Congress was in session, and that prevented him from participating. So we appreciate his regrets. So I'd like to now introduce our 2 candidates that are here. The first one is Margaret Engenbretson. She is representing the Democratic Party. She served in the United States military for 24 years, serving in the United States Navy, the Naval Reserve, and the Minnesota National Air National Guard. Following her service, she worked as a union locomotive electrician and train dispatcher for the BNSF Railroad. Following graduation from the University of Wisconsin-Superior, she worked as a deputy sheriff of corrections at the St. Louis County Jail in Duluth, Minnesota. She received her law degree from Wisconsin and lives and practices in Balsam Lake. Welcome. We'd like to welcome also Dr. Brian Ewert, also representing the Democratic Party. He graduated from Northwestern University and then completed 7 years of internal medicine and kidney training at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He is a kidney specialist at the Marshfield Clinic. He is credited with establishing the first dialysis center at the Mile Bluff Medical Center in Boston and helped form Habitat for Humanity in Marshfield. Both he and his wife, Kathleen Rulka, are very active in their community, working with the food shelf, the library, and various community organizations. And we'd like to welcome you, Dr. Ewert. Our timekeeper for this evening's forum is Kathy Behrens. And our moderator is Tom Linfors from the New Richmond News. Tom has been moderator for several candidate forums, as well as for 3 veteran roundtables. He has taken questions from the public prior to this evening, and he will also explain the process of this evening's forum. So at this time, I will turn the forum over to Tom.
Thank you, Wanda. Special thanks to you for organizing tonight's forum. Some of you might recognize these comments. I've used these before. They work pretty well. We owe Wanda a debt of gratitude for providing these opportunities for all of us to become better informed voters and active participants in our own governance. Also like to thank all the folks out there who submitted questions for tonight's forum. We've been receiving them via email for the last couple of weeks. We're not going to be able to get to everybody's question tonight, not surprisingly. But we've tried to select questions that are representative, generally speaking, of the sum total of questions that we received. Finally, I'd like to thank each of the candidates for making time to participate in tonight's forum. With that, we'll get started. The way it's going to work tonight is each candidate will have a couple of minutes to answer each question. And in case you're wondering, you don't have to use all the time, although that's usually not the problem. Our timekeeper, Kathy, will alert you when 30 seconds remain. Are we using the gong tonight? All right. All right. At the end, you'll each have a chance to give a concluding statement, and we're going to start with a couple of minutes. You'll have a chance to do an introductory statement as well before we get started with the questions, if that's all right. Are you guys okay with me using your first names? We're all family here?
Yes.
You bet.
Good. Absolutely.
All right. Why don't we just get started? Margaret, would you care to start with a short introductory statement?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. This is really an incredible turnout, and right now, just a couple weeks before, about 2.5 weeks before the primary, it is vital that citizens engage and, take note of who's running, do the research, and thoughtfully pull the lever when the time comes. So I just want to thank you for that. Now, as my bio was read earlier, it's pretty complete. I live in Balsam Lake. It's only 30 minutes to get here, and this is the shortest trip I have to take while I'm running for Congress in this vast district. So I'm grateful for that. This election year is not like other election years, and I think we all know that. These are not normal times. This is not a normal election year. And so engagement in this year is particularly important. Now, we're fortunate we have 2 Democrats on the ballot this time, vying for the opportunity to go up against Representative Duffy. So while we both share a lot of the same values, we have some fundamental differences that will come out in the questioning, I'm sure, today. So let me just tell you what kind of Democrat I am. I'm an advocate. I am hardwired that way. I am a fighter. I have fought on behalf of myself. I have advocated on behalf of my family. And when I went to law school, I purposely studied guardian ad litem work and focused most of my solo general practice in Balsam Lake advocating for the best interest of children and disabled adults. That is where my heart lies. And that is the underlying reason why some woman from Balsam Lake stepped forward and decided to run for Congress this year, is because We desperately need true representation. We need someone to fight on our behalf, to go out there and fight for the resources and bring it back to the 7th Congressional District, and to fight for what's right, and also try to get our country on the right path for long-term viability so we can thrive and we can all share in this nation's bounty. Because right now, a lot of us are missing out on it, and it's wrong, and we can do much, much better. So that's why I'm running, and I really appreciate your attention today.
Go ahead, Brian.
Eleanor Roosevelt stated that staying aloof is not a solution, it is cowardly evasion. And I think we are here witnessing an entire group that understands Mrs. Roosevelt's sentiment, because as opposed to being aloof, you are engaged. As opposed to being cowardly, you are courageous. And I particularly want to call out Wanda and the auxiliary for the VFW, representing that deep commitment to engagement as well as to honoring those who had a particular level of courage. So thank you for being here. Thank you. I think this whole entire primary season leading up to August 14th has been extremely helpful for the voters. It's given us a reason. I think we're at about number 10, where Margaret and I come together to talk with the voters. It's been a good opportunity for people to get engaged, and thank you for taking time out of a beautiful summer evening to be here. Well, in terms of my own engagement, so I've been a doctor in the 7th Congressional District for 25 years. I take care of people with kidney disease, so that's dialysis and keeping them away from there. And so I've devoted my life to caring for people who have severe illnesses. My role models were my uncle, who was a missionary doctor in India, my mother, who learned to be a nurse midwife in the tenements of Harlem. And so when I grew up, if we had certain gifts that came to us, if we had certain opportunities that presented to us, the values I was taught is that our response to that was to always offer what we were given and the talents we had developed, to offer those in service to others. So that's why I went to medical school. That's why I came to Marshfield to be a physician, because it was crucial for me to practice medicine in a non-for-profit organization that took care of everyone in the service area. So I've been going along, being a physician along with that. I've been president of the clinic for several years. 5 years ago, I served in that role, so I also understood the complexities. But then 2016 happened, and then last summer, the House passed a bill that would have destroyed and dismantled the health care for the very people I've committed my life to serving. So I started getting more interested in what's going on in Washington. What could I do to change that? Then in December, the tax law went into effect, which weakened Medicare, took 3 years off the Medicare Trust Fund. And I realized that it was time for all of us to do what we could do. And so for me, that was running for Congress. I think other part of my professional life is having been president of the clinic and learning that making decisions is difficult. It's very important to be skillful. It's important not to be reckless, because certainly whether I'm in the intensive care unit caring for a patient, or I'm working on how to make sure that we take care of all the people in the service area, if we get it wrong, people get hurt. So we cannot get it wrong. We have to tend. It's a duty of care that we have. I have been honored to have my leadership skills recognized with endorsements from Congressman Obey, State Senator Robert Jauch, and Mary Heft. But then there was another part of engagement that came along, and that was last fall. A good friend of ours came to us, Kathleen, and to me, and said, you know, there's this movement called United to Amend, because we're dealing with some core issues with our democracy and threats to our democracy, and one of them is the big money in politics. And so the three of us put together the effort to gather the 1,400 signatures in Marshfield last fall so we could put on the ballot the resolution in April of this year stating that corporations are not people and money is not free speech. And we were certainly delighted that it passed with 81% in favor. And I know here in St. Croix, you've also done that. And the good news is it's a movement spreading across the nation, certainly has spread across Wisconsin. So that's been as I've become engaged in this. So I am certainly running for Congress because I think the people of the 7th District need to have leadership and they need to have representation. It's crucial to engage with the people we serve, and it's crucial to be a servant to all 700,000 people. So thank you for coming tonight, and looking forward to the conversation we will have.
Thanks, Brian. All right. Let me look over my list here. All right, so the questions are wide-ranging. Some are very brief questions with potentially long answers. Some are really long questions with potentially short answers. If there's a situation where you need me to repeat the question, please feel free to ask. And if it's unlikely, but it's possible, there's some legislation referred to in here, and if you're unfamiliar, I do have some sort of summaries of it, in case, because I know I wasn't familiar with all of it necessarily. First question, nice big question to start with, and Brian, we'll start with you. What would your number one priority in Washington be if elected?
Well, the number one priority is to get universal, affordable health care for all Americans because it's a fundamental human right. And so we need to build on our previous work that has been done on this. And what that means is we need to have the option so that all Americans can have Medicare. So we need a Medicare for all option. And we need to do this in a way that addresses the problem of the 28 million uninsured and the millions of people who are inadequately insured, and so that they can opt into Medicare. The power of that is they will get their medical care independent of an insurance company. It will be through those same programs that our elders have enjoyed and appreciated for the efficiency of it. And it will also create a situation where particularly with the pharmaceutical industry, we will have the ability to bring down pharmaceutical costs, which is a particularly damaging part of our economics of healthcare currently. We have pharmaceutical companies that have raised prices of cancer life-saving medicines from $20,000 a year to $120,000 a year just because they can. They are ripping off the most vulnerable of patients. They are ripping off the patients who I take care of. And so we desperately need to come up with a solution to this. We need to find a solution that solves the problem. We also need a solution that doesn't create a problem. 150 million Americans currently have insurance through their employer. Some of them are satisfied with it. The goal is to let them choose the health care they want and to not create a backlash which would imperil us accomplishing the good we need to accomplish by making sure that all Americans have affordable and universal health care.
Thank you. Margaret, same question.
So the job of a representative I view as kind of a dual role, and it's in our oath that we take when we get sworn in as members of Congress. And one part is to support and defend the Constitution, and the other part is to faithfully execute the duties of the office. So I'm going to talk about policies. That would be my first priority in this answer. Now, Dr. Ewert is correct. Healthcare is the number one concern of most Americans. We hear it everywhere we travel across the district. We are in a healthcare crisis. Our healthcare costs are absolutely out of control. We are paying so much more than every other nation out there that has universal health care. So I support a single-payer Medicare for all public health insurance program that will cover everyone and will be with you from the day you're born until the day you die, and it is guaranteed. Now, this is one of those issues where my opponent and I really differ. He does not support that. The other thing is I will support, as a co-sponsor in the House, Senator Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All single-payer bill, and my opponent will not on that. So the reason why is that we need to phase out the private health insurance industry. That will bring costs down by quite a bit. And the other thing is we need to disconnect the relationship between employers and employees with their health care. This will free up employers, like small businesses, like I was and a lot of the people in our type of communities, and it'll also free up employees to be able to freely move about with their health insurance.
Thank you, Margaret. Margaret, you get this next question first. Act 10 has changed the landscape in Wisconsin in many ways, most notably in education, the environment, and wages. Since 2011, several states have followed Wisconsin's lead by enacting similar legislation. 7 years later, Act 10 policies in Wisconsin have been tested and the results are in. What is your view on the lasting impact of Act 10? Please include specific examples in education, environment, and wages for Wisconsinites.
This is awful. What's happened? It's Act 10, what it has done to the state of Wisconsin is a travesty. And I think most of us are familiar with what has happened here. So one of the main things Act 10 did is it destroyed the unions in this state, the public sector unions. And there has been studies watching, getting the data afterwards of what has happened. So our wages have gone down. Benefits for workers have gone down, and not just in union jobs, across the board. And we are having trouble retaining talent, teachers, and they are going to other states. I know someone that works in Minnesota that recruits teachers, and they're like, well, it's been good for us, thanks. But it's bad, it's terrible for us. Wisconsin, I always would say, the reason I live in Wisconsin is because it's the best state in the union, and I meant it in every way, and it's because our education system was our crown jewel. Now, the environment, of course, this deregulation push in the effort to supposedly create jobs has done nothing but siphon wealth from almost all of us and send it upward and spoil our water and our air. I talked to a woman that reached out to me today. She can't even drink her own water. And the factory farms are buying up all the farms around her, and they don't want to sell out. They're being forced out. And as far as wages go, look, one of the pillars of our communities, and it's vital in our nation, are unions. We need to collectively bargain. Every job I've ever had has been union, except for serving in the military and being an attorney. And every time I got a union job, I counted myself lucky. So I will promote policies to strengthen our communities through these three topics.
Thanks, Margaret. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Act 10 clearly was this throwback to reversing all of the amazing progress we made in the 20th century, an attempt to return to the Gilded Age where the rich were very rich and the rest of the population was not. And so we clearly need to look at each of those three in terms of what we did in the 20th century and how we benefited. First, of course, was the labor movement. Unions created the middle class. We need collective bargaining. We need wages that are living wages, and we need to have workers be on equal footing with management and with the government, so both government as well as private workers. So clearly we need to reverse that and go back to the successes of the 20th century where workers are empowered, all wages rise, our communities are strengthened. And then education. Clearly one of the greatest accomplishments in the United States is we created universities and an educational systems that were the envy of the world. People came from around the world to be in our educational systems. And we need to return to that because that's the third pillar of the middle class. It's what was created when Franklin Roosevelt, one of his last ideas was the GI Bill, because he recognized that millions of people who had been in service were returning, and he wanted to make sure that they had the path to financial stability, another crucial part of strengthening the middle class. So we need to strengthen the education and make sure that everyone can get the education they need, whether in a 2-year college, a tech school, 4-year college, or joining the trades. And then the last point is the environment, another great legacy of Gaylord Nelson here in Wisconsin of fighting for the environment and looking what we did with clean air and clean water starting in the 1970s and how we have all benefited the economy expanded. We can recognize that success and recognize how that is crucial to building our strong community. So all 3 points of Act 10 are an attempt to take us back 120 years, and we need to resist that and reverse it.
Thank you, Brian. This question goes to you as well. First, Wisconsin's agricultural industry is struggling right now. Dairy farmers in particular are selling their cattle due to low milk prices. There's high instability in commodity prices, and the full impact of the president's new tariffs on soybeans, specialty cheese, and other products has yet to be felt. USDA reports that 338 Wisconsin dairy farms have stopped milking cows during the first 6 months of this year. That's almost 2 per day. What is your opinion about the president's trade policies, and what ideas do you have for supporting Wisconsin's farmers and the many related agribusinesses who are hurting right now?
Clearly, this recent experience with tariffs is one of the best examples of the failure of Congress and Congressman Duffy's failures. The first point is that the Constitution is clear that tariffs and international commerce are the responsibility of Congress. It's in Article 1, one of the few enumerated powers of Congress. So clearly, Congress has chosen to delegate this to the president, and the Congress now needs to pull it back. In fact, there are so many congressmen who recognize this that 107 Republican representatives sent President Trump a letter in March about the tariffs. One name is missing from that letter, and that's Representative Duffy's. So, the harmful effects of the tariffs. Our farmers have worked for years to develop global relationships. Every 4th row of soybeans was headed to China. Well, we now heard that we're going to tap $12 million of taxpayer money to try and cover that. And then we heard that there's going to be opening up soybeans for Europe. The problem is Europe won't accept genetically modified grain, and all the soybeans grown in Wisconsin are Roundup resistant. So even though they open it up, those soybeans aren't going anywhere, hurting our farmers. 50% of the cheese from Wisconsin goes to Mexico. Clearly, having those markets destroyed in a matter of weeks that took years to grow is going to devastate our dairy industry and our cheese making. We now have more cheese in storage than any point in history, and the price of cheddar is at a 10-year low. So we need to find ways to support our dairy farmers. Programs started during the Great Deal. We need to strengthen those so that dairy farmers are supported, so that family-sized farms and local farms can continue to be our producers, and this does not become just an area of outside financiers coming in, extracting wealth from Wisconsin, leaving us with poisoned aquifers, and then leaving Wisconsin. We need the responsibility of Wisconsin homegrown farms. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Margaret, same question.
What our president has done to our nation, to our farmers, to this state in particular with this Trump trade war is absolutely awful. And I am extremely concerned, especially given what has happened in history. As Dr. Ewert has mentioned, the Gilded Age and the events leading up to the Great Depression. We are reenacting a lot of the same events before then. And there was a Smoot-Hawley tariff that Congress did at that time, and it exacerbated and deepened and lengthened the Great Depression. So what President Trump has done here is react to some real-life disputes with other countries, some trade differences, and react into trade deals like NAFTA. He walked us away from the TPP. And he is taking a sledgehammer to trade with these tariffs instead of a scalpel, and that's what you should be doing. Congress does have the responsibility to control trade. Now, it is beneficial for the executive branch for speed and ease in negotiations to do some of this stuff. But what has happened here is that our president has used a disingenuous reason for these trade policies, calling it national security. So that has broken trust with our trading partners. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, what is happening is I've talked to several people who are losing their businesses. They can't produce milk that sells for as much as it costs to produce. So there are things in Congress what we can do. One of the things we can do is promote a supply management program for dairy, because we have a glut of milk in the marketplace. So we need to think this through. Congress needs to take back control.
Margaret, this question's for you. Congressman Sean Duffy has now been in office for 4 consecutive terms. What are your thoughts on term limits, and how long would you be comfortable serving if elected?
Well, that's a loaded question, right? Gee, I don't know. 25 years, 26 years? No. It's going to be, term by term, me personally. We'll see if, I don't want to serve if I'm not effective or something happens to me personally. As far as term limits, there are some good arguments on both sides of this, right? I think the argument against is more compelling to me, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of the folks in parties that are pushing these term limits are ones that want to get Democrats out of office so that they can get Republicans in, because there are disadvantages that they've been working on in our electoral system for a long time. Money in politics, gerrymandering, voter suppression tactics. And so I'm, in general, against it. Besides that, you learn a lot over the years, and you have a lot of knowledge that you can bring to the table. So now, as far as Sean Duffy goes, 4 terms I think is plenty. I think we could have cut it off a while ago, but no, look, we've got a representative that's an absentee congressman. He comes home when it's time to get elected, and he does these sneak town halls with little notice. He puts on his lumberjack outfit, and he goes around, and he gets people excited. And then he goes to Washington, and as was mentioned in the introduction, he sits on the Financial Services Committee, and he votes the way his donors want him to. If you look at where his money comes from, that's how he votes. And his loyalty to one man, President Trump, over our constitutional system and to the constituents of the 7th Congressional District is absolutely unacceptable and disqualifying, if you ask me. Thank you.
Right.
In terms of term limits, I think there are some complex parts of this. I think one is that this is a job where you have to reapply every 2 years in order to stay in the position. So in some ways, the framers of the Constitution, I think they had a good thought, which is especially for representatives to help people stay in touch with their constituents, to every 2 years return to the district, hopefully a lot in between, and to continue to engage with the people. And so the voters really have a responsibility in which you are all fulfilling tonight, which is to become engaged and to make decisions about whether the current incumbent is doing the task adequately. And obviously, I have been frustrated with Representative Duffy. When I was president of the clinic, we would make our legislative visits, and so I would sit in his office and I would say, Congressman Duffy, your constituents are our patients. We have a lot of common ground that we could work on. And it was extremely difficult to get him to engage, recognizing that we were involved with the same group of people. And I think it is because his interests appear to lie elsewhere and not here in the 7th District, as we have seen with his failure to discuss about tariffs, his failure to address the climate change problems that have devastated the northern part of the state with the 2 500-year floods in 3 years. But at the same time, I think we do need to level the playing field in terms of incumbency. And that's through campaign finance law reform. Because what incumbents have, as soon as someone is elected, immediately the checks start pouring in because of being an incumbent. And so we need to make it easier for people to challenge and to be able to raise the resources, and so that there is a more level playing field in terms of how we go about choosing our next representative, because it is a 20,000 square mile district. We cover a lot of ground looking at some very beautiful forest to find the next group of humans to talk to. And so it does take resource. And I think that's part of where we can work towards leveling the playing field so that incumbency does not give one an unfair advantage.
Thank you, Brian. This question's for you. I'm going to get a little deeper into the woods on this. Chronic wasting disease is a serious threat to the nation's wild deer and elk populations. What do you believe needs to be done to combat the growing spread of this disease, particularly here in Wisconsin?
Well, I think the first thing is to put the scientists back in charge of science. And I think clearly part of our problem has been with the Republican mode of governance is to put your vested interest in charge of science. And so I think whether it be chronic wasting disease or it be environmental policy and global warming, or whether it be even healthcare and every other aspect, we need to make sure that we have the scientists who are making these decisions. So clearly with chronic wasting disease, it has to do with doing the hard science of isolating where is the disease, how do you contain it. It's the type of disease that at this point has not lent itself to ways we've eradicated human diseases, such as through vaccination, but certainly through quarantine, and then finding out what needs to be done to control the herd size so you don't have transmission. So this really does get down to sort of basics of what I learned in medical school, which is infectious disease and communicable diseases, and how do you stop the spread in populations. So it does have to do with isolation. It has to do doing the hard work of the science, and then having crafted good policy so that we actually do contain the disease.
Thank you. Margaret?
This is a darn shame with this chronic wasting disease. It did not have to go this way, you know? When they first detected this issue in Wisconsin, the response was lackluster, to say the least. And what has happened is that partisanship and the politicization of levels of government below elected officials has once Walker and Republicans got a hold of our state government, they have done it to the DNR, they've done it to our UW Regent system, they have done it across the board. And what happens is you have loyalists and ideologues and people with monetary interests in charge of really important things. And like Dr. Ewert said, scientists need to be put back into positions where we absolutely need to know what they know and devise a plan, get all stakeholders together, the hunting and game folks in, and government and people that live in the area, and solve problems that way. That's how we're supposed to be doing things across the board, and that simply isn't happening. Now, I am no expert on chronic wasting disease, but I know darn well there's a whole bunch of them in the state of Wisconsin. We could draw on their expertise.
Thank you. Margaret, your first crack at this next question. What actions would you take, if elected, to address our ballooning national debt?
We have got, the way I think about debt and the deficit and our whole economy, I look at it holistically. So since around 1970, we have wages stagnating and the wages and income of the highest earners growing and growing and growing, and the wealth has just been siphoned up to the top 1% corporations and special interests. And why that happened is because our Congress has been captured by special interests and corporations. So it used to be where Congress used to have their own folks and experts, nonpartisan folks, to write our own legislation that fits their district, solve problems, and make tax laws that way. Well, now, this recent tax bill that was passed in 2017 wasn't written that way. It was basically auctioned off to the highest bidder, and all these special interests wrote our tax bill, and there's all these little loopholes, and of course we're stuck with this monstrosity. So what we need to do is repeal and replace that tax bill. And we need to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy and corporations and close loopholes, because the welfare for corporations and the ultra-wealthy is submerged in our tax code so that nobody thinks of it as welfare, but they are getting a ton of breaks, right? And what we need to do is close that and have them pay their fair share of the revenue, and this will pay down the debt. And we need to invest. We need to invest in infrastructure and education, and these things it's proven that this will grow the economy, and that's how we're going to bring down the debt.
Brian?
Well, first is not to pass irresponsible legislation like the tax law that was passed in December, which in the dark of night, people were still scribbling in the margins, trying to figure out what the legislation was, which actually added $1.5 trillion to the national debt. Somewhat surprising that the Democrats have been the fiscally responsible party over the last 50 years. In fact, our last balanced budget was under President Clinton. And then President Bush came in and promptly gave tax breaks to the wealthy and drove us into debt. And then, of course, he launched unfunded wars, which he never asked for any sacrifice other than that we should all go shop as our troops dutifully went off to serve our country. So clearly, one of the first things to do is to get back to some fiscal sense that when we are at a time of economic expansion, that means wealth is growing. Now, where is the wealth growing? Well, it's growing in the 0.1%. It's not growing in the 90% bottom part. So we need to pay attention to where is the revenue. So part of it is having fair tax laws that are progressive, that make sure, President Eisenhower, as a Republican, had tax rates of over 50 to 60% at the upper income brackets. Not saying we have to go back to that level, but clearly the country has had much higher tax rates and built the interstate system. The other is this thing called tax exclusion, basically taxes not paid. $1.5 trillion per year, half of that goes to the top 20% of the wealth in the country. So every year, Congress should look at what's not being paid, just as they look at saying, well, maybe the federal workers need to take a wage cut, or we need to cut more out of Medicare. Instead, we should look at the taxes not being paid, because we don't tax interest and dividend income at the same way that we tax people who work every day. So we need to get back to a fair taxing structure where people who work are not bearing an unfair burden versus people who aren't working but just enjoying their dividend checks.
All right, Brian, this question's for you. Where do you stand on the Older Americans Act and serving the disabled population? The Older Americans Act, originally enacted in 1965, it supports a range of home and community-based services such as Meals on Wheels and other nutritional programs. In-home services like transportation, legal services, elder abuse prevention, and caregiver support.
One of the great successes of the 20th century is we raised our elders out of poverty. So last week, the Wisconsin Poverty Report was issued, and they asked certain questions of what's the poverty rate. Unfortunately, it's once again increasing, even though we're in economic expansion. But the other question that they answer is, if we didn't have programs, as you just mentioned, with supporting people and Social Security and all the programs for the aging, what do those programs do? The poverty rate amongst our elders would be 40% higher without those types of programs. So those programs are crucial of how we strengthen our communities. And so as we drive around the 7th Congressional District, we'll see all of a sudden an apartment building, it'll say USDA underneath it. Well, that's because the United States Department of Agriculture helped fund that. So through the various mechanisms of how we as a country pool our resources and then say, let us take care of our elders, because our elders definitely need to have food security. They need to have housing security. They certainly need to have heating security. So it is crucial to continue to strengthen those and to realize that if we need to adjust our federal budget, as I was mentioning, we need to look at the taxes not being paid by the wealthy before we start taking away the meals from our elders who are living in subsidized housing, who only have a Social Security check, which barely keeps them out of the poverty level.
Thanks, Brian. Margaret?
This one gets me worked up. How we treat our elders in this nation is is unacceptable in my book. As my bio states, and as I've talked about, I chose to be a guardian ad litem and advocate for the best interests of disabled adults. So I have been in probably every nursing home in this region, assisted living home. I've gone in the courtroom, and I've fought on behalf of elderly folks that need help. And another thing that I've seen that's happened since I've lived here is I just went to Walmart at St. Croix Falls up on the hill there, and a lot of the people that work there should be retired and at home. And they're barely getting by. They're at their stools at the cash register, and you can tell they're tired and they don't want to be there. And you know what? They shouldn't be there. We are failing our elderly. So what I believe we need to do is address Social Security. Now, we right now only tax payroll tax. What we can do is raise the cap on Social Security, and we can also use tax from unearned income, such as dividends, like Dr. Ewert mentioned, and stuff, and boost up Social Security, right? The other things that we can do are address transportation issues, especially in the 7th. Now, my mom, once my father died, she lost his Social Security check. We had a beautiful home on Balsam Lake. The taxes have gone up so that nobody local can actually afford to live on Balsam Lake anymore. And then she lost the home, and the devastation to her spirit has been heartbreaking. And this is repeated all over our area. So we need to figure out a way to protect our elders and provide them transportation and every other community service to keep them in their homes as long as possible.
Thank you, Margaret, and this question's for you. Madison, Milwaukee County, and Racine have been identified as sanctuary cities, communities with a policy of preventing officials from inquiring about immigration status of arrestees or those refusing to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. Proposed legislation to end sanctuary cities in Wisconsin passed the state assembly last year but failed to receive a vote in the Senate. Where do you stand on sanctuary city legislation?
This thing is so politicized, it's a shame. Look, I was a corrections officer for 2.5 years. I am pro-law enforcement because they protect and serve us, and they're, most of the folks that go out there and work in our communities this way are good folks. Unfortunately, just like the military, our police and corrections and all of this has been used as a battering ram and a political cudgel, and the sanctuary cities is a perfect example of that. Look, we need local police to be able to gain the trust of the communities in which they work. It makes them safer, it makes the community safer, and what these racially charged, divisive political tactics regarding immigration right now is wrong, and it's harming all of us. So these sanctuary cities, you know what? The federal government needs to back off and allow our cities to police the way they want. And if the federal government wants to, manage immigration and deportation, they already have that under our laws. It's already set up this way. So this is all being built up and scaring people, and it's a way to cut funding and punish, and it's going after liberal cities, and it's all wrong. Look, the more we politicize things that shouldn't be politicized, we all lose. I don't care what party you belong to and what income bracket you're in. We all lose when politicians do this. And it's one of the reasons I'm running, because I'm sick and tired of it. And I know everybody I talk to is tired of this too. Look, we need to send people there that adhere to their oath of office, do their duty, and, just try to not harm folks and make things better while they're there.
Brian?
Yeah, the need for sanctuary cities is because of the failure of the federal government. Immigration, we need immigration reform in this country, And what these cities are doing is merely responding and saying their goal is to have safe, strong communities. And by setting up sanctuaries, what they're saying is when there's a crime being committed in the neighborhood, they want everyone in the neighborhood to feel safe about calling law enforcement to address the crime without the fear that their family member will be deported. So clearly, this is a failure of Congress. In 2013, the U.S. Senate passed an immigration reform. It went to the House, and they never even took it up for debate. They didn't amend it. They didn't put it through hearings. It was a failure in the House of Representatives. And that's why I'm running, is because we cannot fail to solve these problems. So the federal government needs to solve the immigration issues. First of all, we need to declare that never again will we separate toddlers from their parents and then lose track of people, which is a travesty and a moral outrage. We need to make sure that dreamers can become citizens because they were brought here as children and they have proven that they're law-abiding, hardworking members of our society. And we need to make sure that the 11 million people who are here milking our cows, working our factories, cleaning our hotel rooms, come to legal status, and so they are legal members of our communities, and so that they have no fear of calling the police when there's a crime next door or domestic violence occurring. Then there would not be need for sanctuary cities. So when sanctuary cities arise, they are not at fault. It is a criticism of the failure of Congress to do its duty and craft solutions that strengthen our communities.
All right, Brian, this question is for you. Do you think there should be any new gun restrictions in response to the mass shootings we've experienced in the past decade? If you instead believe this is a societal issue and more attention should be given to mental health, would you commit to increasing funding and accessibility to mental health services?
Well, in terms of guns, there are several points to this. First, I continue to honor the Second Amendment rights of all of the responsible gun owners and hunters that make up the culture of northern Wisconsin who use guns responsibly for hunting and sporting. But clearly, we need to get guns out of the hands of dangerous people. One of the key ways is to actually develop the mechanisms to enforce the laws we have on the books, such as background checks, and to make sure that the background check is followed through. The mass shooting in the church in South Carolina, the mass shooting in the church in Texas, neither of those people should have gotten guns. Unfortunately, the background check system fell apart, and because in the case of South Carolina, the paperwork couldn't be found in 3 days, he was able to buy his guns, as opposed to saying, you'll have to wait longer till we get this followed through. So first of all, just doing the background checks and making sure. The second issue is to have red flag laws, where if someone is acting irresponsibly, if someone has a history of domestic violence, which is the strongest predictor for mass fatality events, that those people, through a judicial process, give up, they lose their constitutional rights because they are acting irresponsibly. The next is to get the research going. So in the 1990s, there was an amendment named after a representative, so it was called the Dickey Amendment, which the interpretation was that federal dollars could not be used to study gun violence. Well, we have 30,000 deaths. They need to be studied. 20,000 of those are suicides. In Wisconsin, the risk of suicide in this part of the state, the risk of suicide is 10 times higher from a gun than the risk of homicide. We need to understand the mental health. We need to commit the resources to treating mental health, and we need to help gun owners to realize that if there are guns in the home and someone has mental illness in the home, for the sake of your family, put the guns away and keep them away from the person who is distraught or depressed.
Go ahead, Margaret.
So I mentioned earlier I'm retired military, I'm a veteran. Now, when I was in the military, I was trained on a M16 and various sidearms. I was also trained on anti-tank weapons. I was also certified in explosives. Now, for each of these tools, and that's how I view them, we would have extensive training and safety classes before we ever even laid hands on these weapons, right? And then we would go out to the range, and everybody had the opportunity to have a training timeout if something was going awry. Look, the military understands that they're very dangerous items, and they treat them as tools, and they treat them with respect. Now, for myself, I own a gun. And I think that folks who hunt, who stock their freezer with deer every year and whatever other game they have with their rifles, fine. If they have a weapon for home defense, like a shotgun or a handgun, that's fine. Sporting guns. Now, when it comes to military-style weaponry in the hands of civilians, sold to people that we haven't even done background checks on and out of the trunks of cars, this is madness. I mean, this is absolutely nuts, right? And I cannot believe that we act like this isn't nuts all the time, because these are very dangerous weapons. We have a mass shooting epidemic going on in this country, and the members of Congress are not responsive to the American people. Most people want this to stop and to get these weapons out of the hands of people. So background checks, limit clip sizes. We need to address mental health. And you know what's underlying a lot of this stuff is despair. And we need to help our people in this nation thrive.
Thank you. Next question, Margaret. While jobs are plentiful in Wisconsin, the wages are so low that many adults are working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. This leaves little time for parents to spend with their children during the critical formation years. What are some real solutions that you support or would support to ensure that our children have the care and the attention that they need to grow into quality citizens?
So I opened up my law practice in 2010. And like I said, I purposely focused most of my practice on guardian ad litem work. So that was 2 years after the financial crash. And over time, I noticed the severity and the type of problems of cases coming to me getting worse over the years. Because as a guardian ad litem, you do investigations. You go to their schools, you go into their homes, you interview people. And I'm also on the board of the CRA, the Community Referral Agency, which is the domestic violence shelter that serves Polk, Burnett, and Barron counties. Now, all of this together, what's happening over in our area is getting worse. So there's several things feeding into this. People have to work, like you said, more than one job to even keep their head above water. We need to get living wages for people. If you work a full-time job, you should be able to live on that and have children. I mean, but that is not happening out here. So I'm for a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour as part of an entire package. Now, this wouldn't be an overnight flip the switch out here, because our economy could not handle that load right away. But we need to address that, and we also need to pour money right back into our schools that was taken out by Governor Walker and the Republicans. So all of this feeds together. Look, we all rely on one another, and we all depend on one another. So my law practice on Main Street in Balsam Lake was affected by the farm out county and the bar and grill on Main Street and the teacher that lives down the street from me. We are all tied together in a rural economy like ours. And we have got to start investing in each other and treating each other with respect and kindness instead of trying to find out what they're getting that you're not. So that's what I think on that.
Thanks, Margaret. Brian.
Yeah, raising children, probably one of the most important tasks we can have in a culture of how do we raise our children so that they too grow up to have financial stability. And again, this whole concept of regrowing the middle class. So part of that is wages. And certainly that involves the $15 an hour, doing it in a way where we make sure that small business owners do not unduly bear the brunt of regrowing the middle class. Once again, strengthening unions so that there are living wages and wages where one member of the family can work part-time, and then that can be an option how much the other member of the family works. And then the third is education, to make sure that people can get the training and the education they need, and so that they have a wage and a salary that promotes them into financial stability, so that there is time in the day to be with their children and to do that hard and good work of raising our children. So all of those play into this. The next part is the parental leave. Most other countries, like the United States, give a significant more parental leave to both the father and the mother because they honor the necessary work of raising children, particularly in the early years. And part of that is also recognizing that more often than not, that's the mother, and then that sets in place why women earn less money than men going forward. And so there needs to be a balancing act that if a parent of either gender, but often it is the woman, takes time off from the career path to be home with the children, that needs to be honored then when it comes time for promotions and salaries, that good work was being done. We have a problem in our countries that we do not honor the value of caregiving. We have 35 million caregivers who are providing over $500 billion of care to our children and our elders that is uncompensated. And we need to recognize that, we need to honor it, and we particularly need to make sure it doesn't impair people as they move up their professional scale.
Thank you, Brian. Next question. Depending on which party was in power at the time, both Democrats and Republicans have changed positions when it comes to whether Supreme Court nominations should be considered during an election year. Should a vote occur for Justice Kennedy's replacement before the fall 2018 election?
Yeah, this is tough because we get into some tit-for-tat stuff going on here, and I must say that, you know, there's a few things that have happened in the last few years that actually just viscerally make me sick. And what Mitch McConnell did to not move forward Merrick Garland's nomination, I think it was unconstitutional, it was criminal. Because, you know, the veneer of society and democracy is fairly thin, and it requires all of us to honor the rules and to honor the Constitution. And Senator McConnell broke that trust by not moving that nomination forward. And so it is difficult to always want to be the good person. And now to say, okay, now we're going to honor the rules, and so when President Trump nominates someone, we'll go ahead and do that. Because unfortunately, due to the failure of Congress from not passing necessary legislation, more and more of our laws are coming through executive orders and then adjudicated through the courts. And so the court has been politicized. So this is a very difficult situation. You know, there's, like I say, there's part of me that says, okay, you did to Justice Garland, the next one is the Democrats' call, and then we're going to call it even, and then we're going to stop this nonsense and return to constitutional law, which is the sitting president nominates the justice gets a hearing in due time, and would have been, you know, vetted through the Senate in 2016. So I think it was a travesty, clearly, of the failure and the decay of our democracy. It's close to the top of the events in the last 10 years.
Thank you. Margaret?
Yeah, nothing gets people worked up more than the Supreme Court, right? I mean, these are issues that affect every one of us and will last for generations. It is like the highest stakes in our government, and these are consequences of elections. Now, Senator McConnell did not even allow President Obama's pick, Merrick Garland, to be interviewed or anything. He just shut it down cold and made up this thing about some rule in an election year. Well, we all know that that's not true. So that was bad faith, and breaking these democratic norms, that was one of the big ones. Our whole Congress, over the years, especially since the Tea Party wave of 2010, has started breaking down how it's functioning. Things that were not okay before are now allowed. And there's so much of it that it's gridlocked our Congress, and that's why nothing is happening. Now, as far as this Kavanaugh appointment, the president is in office, and he's allowed to make nominations, and he chose his nomination. Now, I don't think that the Democrats in the Senate should play a tit for tat and revenge, because it'll never stop. Besides, it probably won't do any good anyway. The one question I do have, and I know a lot of Americans have, is the status of our president. This man is under investigation. We have a special counsel investigation going on. The Russian government interfered and helped him get elected, right? This is going on as a cloud over everything. So I would hope that a bipartisan group of senators would come together and put the brakes on these nominations until we get through this process of finding out what happened.
Hey, Margaret. You're up on this question. Coming back to the backyard here a little bit. Farmers, or more appropriately, farm corporations, receive large subsidies from the federal government. In exchange for those subsidies, what conservation measures could be imposed on private farmland to improve water quality, wildlife habitat, and air quality?
I've never been a farmer, and so as I've been running for Congress, I've made an effort to try to educate myself on this more. So I'm no expert. I'm going to just tell you that right now. However, I have spoken with small farmers about what it's like to be a farmer in Wisconsin right now when these corporate farms are getting all the help from the federal government and regulations are getting rolled back, and they are just gobbling up these small farms, and we are losing the very fabric of our communities out here. In fact, I read an article today that said in the not too distant future, most of rural America will be all corporate farms, and there will be no jobs on Main Street, and we'll all have to head to the cities. Look, I don't want that, and I know that most people who live out here in this beautiful part of the state don't want that either. What we need to do is disincentivize the consolidation of farms. We need to come together and figure out how much is too much, how big is too big, and what are we going to do about raising our food and growing our crops, because we're doing it really irresponsibly. We're spoiling our water. We're wrecking our beautiful lakes. We're putting families out of business that have had the farm in their families for generations. I mean, what are we doing to ourselves here? We need to reverse this trend. And this is across almost every industry in the United States. Due to this deregulation and the unenforcement of our antitrust laws, we have over-consolidation in almost every industry. And it's making our quality of life worse. Our costs go up. The taste of our food get worse. I mean, that's what we really need to do.
Thanks, Margaret. Go ahead, Brian.
So I think the question cuts to the core of businesses bearing the fully loaded costs of their business. And that's really what environmental protection is all about, that a business cannot push the cost of their business onto the community by spoiling the water or polluting the air. And so in agriculture, and certainly here on the western side of the state with the limestone, and then if you go over by Lake Michigan, so we just have a certain type of rock formation that when you put manure on the surface, it finds cracks in the limestone and quickly travels to the groundwater. And so the day after the manure is spread, when you go to pour a glass of water, it comes out brown. And if you study the bacteria in that water, you find a lot of bacteria that grow in the guts of cows. So that is a huge problem, obviously. And so certainly we want to support our farmers, but we want farmers also to be buying into that it's not just for the house down the lane where they want to be able to draw a tub of water for their kid to take a bath without it being cow manure, but it's the 7-generation concept. That clearly whatever decisions we make, we need to make sure they're sustainable for us here and now, and they are sustainable for 7 generations going forward, so that we do not despoil our water and poison our air for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that we need to deliver an environment to them that's even in better condition than what we inherited from our ancestors. So I think in terms of farming, it does go to the same idea of having setbacks, so you don't have runoff going into the streams, and it has to do with scientifically based manure management, and so the manure is not being spread in such a way that it contaminates the groundwater on which rural America depends.
Thanks, Brian. Next question for you. The current administration has proposed some very drastic cuts to current and future federal employees' benefits, including those employees that have been already put in 25 plus years. What's your view on these proposed cuts and overall view on compensation and benefits for the federal workforce?
You know, the development of the civil service, civil servants goes back to the late 1800s. And you know, it has also been over the years actually where civil rights were fought back and forth with various presidents pushing them back, but eventually became a way in which we advanced Americans, another step of how did we grow the middle class. And part of that is providing the benefits, because these benefits are benefits such as health care and retirement. And so we definitely need to make sure they are strengthened, because our goal is that people have a living wage for financial security during their years of work, and that at the time of retirement, they are maintained, that they also continue to have an adequate amount of resource. And so this attack on workers that has happened at the federal level also needs to be reversed. Part of that has been the outsourcing. So instead of having federal employees, everything becomes contracted. And of course, as we learned during the Iraq War, all of a sudden it was being contracted out to a company that the vice president had had a very vested interest in. And so it just ends up being the worst of war profiteering. So I think we need to return to valuing our federal employees. We value them by making sure that federal employees do the federal work, and we value them by making sure they are paid the prevailing wage. We value them by making sure that they are paid good benefits so that they have good benefits during their working years as well as for retirement.
Thanks, Brian. Go ahead, Margaret.
Well, I'm 100% against cutting benefits and wages for our federal workforce. I mean, that is unacceptable. This is part of a larger strategy that has been used for a very, very long time, and that is to devalue the importance of government itself and the people who work in government. And this is all in an effort to shrink government, downsize government, so that we can tackle that debt and deficit, right? Well, no. What's happening here is that as we have attacks on our government and underfund it and underfund our employees, our government doesn't function as well. And then there are proposals, of course, to privatize it, surprise, right? And this is not the direction we need to be going. We need to have a robust civil workforce, civil servant workforce. We need to allow them to collectively bargain. We need to treat them with the value that they deserve and what kind of effort they're putting forth, and be rewarded for years of service. I mean, and it's not just in federal government. Workers in general in every field, our protections, our labor protections, our safety protections, our wages, our benefits, it's all just being nickeled and dimed away from us. And we need to reverse this trend, and there's several things we need to do. We need to support unions. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to require that the government only hire firms and employees that meet certain standards, and basically start supporting the American people again.
All right, Margaret, here's the next question for you. This one's got a little bit of a preface to it. Nearly 17,000 registered Wisconsin voters, potentially more, were kept from the polls in November 2016 by the state's strict voter ID law, according to a recent survey of non-voters by a couple of University of Wisconsin political scientists. That November turnout in Wisconsin, 69.4% of eligible voters, was the lowest in a presidential election since the year 2000. Wisconsin's voter ID laws enacted in 2011 require citizens to show a driver's license, a passport, a a naturalization certificate, or one of several other fairly uncommon documents before casting a ballot. Republicans have argued that an ID requirement necessary to combat an epidemic of fraudulent voting. In earnest, it appears the law's main intent is to keep people, the poor, the young, and minorities, from going to the polls. What will you do to make sure all eligible voters in Wisconsin get the chance to vote free and fair?
Rig the vote. You know, that's how you win when you have an unfavorable position on policies. So that's what's been going on in this nation. As the Republican Party's platform positions, big business, funneling money up to the top, deregulation, treating workers poorly, and pillaging our natural resources. People don't like that. And people don't like it when you come after our health insurance, our Social Security, our Medicare, and everything. So what has gone on is a concerted effort to make sure that you can maximize the votes for your position through gerrymandering, through voter ID laws, and this thing about supposed fraudulent voting. There's zero evidence to support this position. This changing of when you can vote, how you can vote, and all that, the changing of the Voting Rights Act from the Supreme Court kind of threw in a hand and helped out mess up our voting system. Look, if you're a citizen of the United States, you should be able to vote, and it should be easy. There should be automatic voter registration. There are mechanisms that you can use to do this through driver's licenses. We have everyone have Social Security numbers. We can make them registered to vote. There are several mechanisms. We need to expand the time that is available to vote. We need to have it on days that most people are off work. And we need to allow folks to mail in ballots as another way to make it easy, especially for shut-ins in rural Wisconsin to vote. So basically knock down the barriers to voting. Let them vote.
Thank you, Margaret. Brian.
In a democracy, we should be doing everything possible to get the maximum turnout to vote. There was an 80-year-old woman in Adams County. She was born at home in Adams County. She never got her driver's license. So when the voter ID law came in, all of a sudden this woman who had never traveled more than 50 miles from her home wasn't able to get onto the voter rolls because she didn't have officially the documents. Clearly, Americans are being disenfranchised. We know that this whole issue of voter fraud has never influenced an election. It is, complete, just a story told to justify voter suppression. So at the federal level, clearly what we need to do is strengthen the Voting Rights Act. If there are parts of it that the Supreme Court say no longer are valid, then Congress needs to stand up and do its job and do everything possible so that every American has the easiest path to voting, including whether that be to be able to vote through the mail, to open up that it's a national holiday, to do the voting on weekends. There are all sorts of techniques that many other countries have done to maximize voting participation, and that's clearly what we should do. It gets back to honoring the intent of a democracy, that in a democracy what we want is full participation. We don't want to win the game by excluding the people who don't agree with us. We want to win the game because we are representing the interests of the majority of the people.
Thank you, Brian. All right, I've been told I need to keep this to an hour and a half, so that's going to be about one more question and then a wrap-up from you guys. So I have a number of questions left, but I'm going to go with this question to conclude it tonight. We have a president who loses more credibility each day in the eyes of citizens of this country and allies around the world, and a Congress afraid, unwilling, or indifferent to doing anything about it. How will you restore credibility to our government?
I think you were speaking about the tone of leadership. And I think partly as leaders, what we need to do is we always need to speak in a way that strengthens our communities. And so when we see people representing principles which are not our principles for which the greatest generation sacrificed and died for, we stand up and say, no, Nazism is not an American principle, and it is not an equally good value system. It is a evil value system, and that's why those who came before us died to get rid of it. So I think we need to always be setting the tone that we strengthen the language that brings our communities together. We have this problem in America that the voices of hate and division have gotten way too loud. We need to instead strengthen how each neighbor relates and that we stay in our communities, because at the end of the day, we live in communities, not political parties. You know, I think in terms of the president, clearly, Robert Mueller, as a lifelong of service to this country, as a Marine, as a law enforcement officer, as the head of the FBI, and incidentally, as a Republican, so we're not really worried about his partisanship in this. He's just doing his good work, and we need to let him do his good work. I think it's easy to grow impatient with the legal process, but this is what makes the rule of law what it is that we are patient, we let the process of discovery go on, and we see what he finds through his diligent work. But in the meantime, we always speak to make sure our language strengthens our communities and does not tear them apart.
Margaret.
This has been really hard to watch for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the folks in this room, watching our president tweet out foreign policy, all caps, making wild threats about nuclear issues with foreign nations, calling people names. I mean, it's embarrassing, and it's so damaging to our reputation overseas. Another thing that's happened is what's happened to our State Department. They've gutted it. I mean, hundreds of years of experience, diplomats out the door, pushed out, sidelined, and they have ramped up the importance of defense, military defense, and ramped down the importance of diplomacy and development. And we need to readjust that balance. Now, as far as Congress goes, I mentioned earlier in an earlier answer about how, especially since 2010, when we had the Tea Party wave came in and they took a bunch of seats, boy, they were there and they were all about the deficit, and they cared about the Constitution and everything. Well, what ended up happening is they started grandstanding, and they ended up shutting down our government. And everything started to work incorrectly, and it was zero sum. I must win. I won't negotiate. I won't compromise. And then the American people's trust obviously has seeped further away in the faith of members of Congress. So the only way back from all of this is, in this election year, vote for those people who are running for the right reasons and who you think will uphold the values that you hold dear as an American. And those people go to Congress and do the right thing day after day, no matter how hard it gets, day after day, and try to restore how things are supposed to work in this nation.
That's going to be our last question. I'm going to give you guys each a couple of minutes to deliver some concluding remarks, but I want to thank you both first for your thoughtful answers to our questions tonight. Margaret, why don't you take the first 2 minutes here?
Again, thank you all for coming tonight. It's really important what you're doing and what Brian and I are doing. It really matters. So this year, because it is so vitally important, this is our opportunity, folks, to unseat Sean Duffy. He's an incumbent. He has, I think he's sitting on several $1 million right now in fundraising in the piggy bank, ready to aim it at either one of us, whoever wins the primary. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be tough. It's 26 counties, and it's a lot of work. But this is our chance. If you want to stick with the status quo and kind of tweak around the edges of how things are and, gradually improve things, then I'm not your candidate, right? But if you understand that we are at a very important turning point in this nation, and we have some fundamental, serious issues in this country that requires bold leadership and someone that will fight on your behalf every single day to bring home resources to the 7th, and who uphold their oath of office, then I am your candidate. Look, I'm running because I care. I'm running because I am compelled to serve and step forward. So if you believe that this is the year to do it, I hope you support me. I have known that as I travel the district, people are looking for people that are from the district and who represent and identify with a lot of the folks in the district. Look, I'm retired military, I'm former union, and I've worked a lot of different jobs, and I'm all UW educated. Thanks a lot.
Brian.
Again, thank you for your engagement and for your courage. I think for many of us, after 2016, we realized that what we had been doing wasn't enough, and we needed to engage and find our courage. So for me, where's the source of that? It's when I round in the dialysis unit and I realized that cleansing the blood is the easy part. Making sure that person has food and shelter and transportation is the tough part of taking care of them. It's when I talk to a 16-year-old who looks at me and says, if she goes to the University of Wisconsin to fund her education, she will die in debt. It's when we go up to Ashland and the mayor of Ashland has to, in dismay, say that that 20 million gallons of sewage spilled into Lake Superior with the last flood. These are the things that have gotten me engaged and helped me find my courage to stand up to this. And I came into this because also I have a history of leadership and a history of solving problems. So certainly as a physician taking care of some of the sickest people that are there, it has always required continual learning and continual paying attention because the problems that we are needing to solve are difficult. But we do that through teamwork. We do that by focusing on the mission in front of us. And we do that by cooperating with everyone on the team, regardless of their political affiliation. In leadership, I found the same thing. Problems are difficult. We cannot afford to get it wrong. It's important to be knowledgeable, to do the homework. It's important to be skillful. And it's always important to lead with a heart of compassion for those who are most vulnerable to protect them. So I am running for this race because I think the people of the 7th District deserve better representation than they have received from Representative Duffy because they need to have their interests represented so that we can make all of our communities strong. Thank you very much for coming out and participating.
Thanks to you again. Thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. Don't forget to vote. I believe it's August
14th.
Yes,
August
please
14th.
don't forget that voting part.
That's the first most important election. That's it. Thanks all for coming tonight.